The grand hall of the Galactic Coalition headquarters gleamed with lights from 1,000 worlds. Captain stood at attention in his dress uniform, trying not to feel small among the alien delegates who surrounded him. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide, but all of them carried themselves with the confidence of species that had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Humanity was the newcomer here. The junior member finally accepted after 50 years of waiting and proving themselves worthy. Ambassador stepped forward to receive the official welcome treaty. She smiled warmly as the Coalition Supreme Chancellor handed her the crystal tablet. The ceremony was beautiful, peaceful, everything humanity had hoped for. They were no longer alone in the universe. They had friends now, allies, partners in exploring the great darkness between stars. And now, the Chancellor announced in his deep, rumbling voice, "We shall tour your military capabilities, as is tradition for all new members." Felt a flutter of nervousness. He knew what was coming. Every species had to show their weapons, their ships, their ability to defend Coalition space. It was standard procedure, nothing to worry about. But still, he wondered what these ancient species would think of humanity's modest fleet. The delegation traveled to Earth's orbit aboard a sleek Coalition transport. Through the windows, could see his home world turning slowly below, blue and white and beautiful. Nearby floated the massive ring of the Orbital Heritage Museum, humanity's tribute to its own history in space. Commander met them at the docking port. She was young for her position, but she had earned it through brilliance and hard work. The museum was her responsibility, her pride and joy. She had personally overseen the restoration of every ship in the collection. "Welcome to the museum," said, bowing respectfully. "We are honored to show you humanity's journey to the stars." The aliens followed her through the corridors, walked beside them, watching their faces carefully. The museum was impressive by human standards. Huge viewing windows showed dozens of ships floating in the void, each one carefully preserved and maintained. These were the vessels that had carried humanity from one planet to many, from Earth to Mars to the Belt and beyond. But the aliens were not impressed. A tall, blue-skinned delegate stopped at the first viewing window. Inside floated an ancient submarine, its hull painted black, its shape long and cylindrical. It had been converted for space travel in the early 2100s, retrofitted with basic fusion engines and life support. "This," the alien said, his voice filled with amusement, "this was a warship." "Yes," replied, keeping her voice steady. "The Nautilus served in the Belt Wars. It destroyed 4 enemy vessels and protected 3 colony ships." Another alien, this one covered in silver scales, laughed openly. "It has no energy shields, no plasma weapons. How did it even survive?" "Armor," said simply. 30 centimeters of layered steel and composite materials." The aliens laughed harder. One of them, a floating creature with multiple tentacles, spoke in a high, whistling voice. "Armor, physical armor, how primitive. A single plasma lance would cut through that like air." Felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. Beside him, he noticed an old man in a military uniform standing quietly in the corner. Admiral, the legendary veteran of the Mars Rebellion. His face showed no emotion, but his eyes were sharp and watching. The group moved to the next section. Here floated the early destroyers and cruisers, ships from the 2200s with their distinctive angular designs and massive arrays. These had been the backbone of Earth's defense fleet before humanity met the Coalition. One alien said, shaking his head, "Kinetic weapons. Do you know how easy these are to dodge? Our point defense systems destroy incoming projectiles automatically." "And look at the engines," another added. "Fusion drives so slow, so inefficient. Our subspace drives are 10 times faster." His face remained calm, but could see her hands clenched behind her back. She loved these ships. She had spent years bringing them back to life, making sure every system worked perfectly. To hear them mocked like this hurt her deeply. The tour continued. The aliens laughed at the chemical rocket carriers. They mocked the electromagnetic pulse missiles. They shook their heads at the nuclear torpedoes that humanity had once considered their most powerful weapons. "You keep all these operational?" one delegate asked, genuinely curious. "They still work?" "Yes," said proudly. "Every ship here can launch and fight. We maintain them in perfect condition." "How quaint," the delegate replied. "Like a child keeping old toys." The final stop was the crown jewel of the museum, the Indomitable, a massive carrier from the 22nd century. It stretched nearly 2 kilometers long, its hull covered in armor plating, its launch bays capable of deploying 200 fighter craft. The ship had been retrofitted with early fusion drives and upgraded computers, but its core design remained unchanged from its origins. "This is the Indomitable," said quietly. "Flagship of the Third Fleet during the Mars Rebellion. It never lost a battle." An alien with 4 arms waved dismissively. "Against other primitive humans, perhaps. Against real military forces, this ship would last minutes." Had heard enough, he stepped forward, his voice hard. "These ships won wars, they protected millions of people. They deserve respect." The 4-armed alien looked at him with something like pity. "Young captain, we do not mean to insult. We simply state facts. These vessels are relics of a less advanced time. Be grateful you have moved beyond such crude technology." Admiral finally spoke. His voice was soft but carried across the room. "Crude technology has its advantages." The aliens turned to look at him. "What advantages could there possibly be?" one asked. Smiled slightly. "You'll understand soon enough." Before anyone could ask what he meant, alarms began blaring throughout the station. Red lights flashed in the corridors. A young officer ran into the room, her face pale with fear. "Admiral, Captain, we have multiple contacts on long-range sensors. Unknown fleet entering the solar system. Estimate over 500 vessels." The room fell silent. The aliens looked at each other with concern, felt his heart begin to race. 500 ships was an invasion force. "Who are they?" Ambassador demanded. "Unknown, ma'am," the officer replied. "They're not responding to hails. They're not in any coalition database. They're just coming." Looked out the viewing window at the museum ships floating peacefully in the void. Behind him, he heard one of the aliens whisper, "This is bad, very bad." Admiral walked slowly to the window and placed one hand against the glass. He stared at the Indomitable for a long moment, then turned to face the group. "It seems," he said quietly, "we are about to need these crude relics after all." The alarms continued to wail as the unknown fleet drew closer to Earth, and in the museum, the old warships waited in silence. The Coalition Command Center on Earth buzzed with activity. Officers ran between stations, their voices sharp with urgency. Captain watched the main display screen, where hundreds of red dots represented the approaching enemy fleet. They had identified themselves now. The Dominion, a hostile empire from beyond Coalition space. Doctor, a specialist in alien technology, stood beside General Dong at the command table. She pointed at the analysis streaming across her tablet. "They have been conquering systems for decades. They're aggressive, technologically advanced, and they don't negotiate." "Why didn't the Coalition warn us about them?" General Dong demanded, his voice tight with anger. "They've never attacked Coalition space before," explained. "They stayed in their own sector, but apparently they see humanity as weak, an easy target, a way to test Coalition defenses." Ambassador arrived, still wearing her ceremonial robes from the morning's celebration. The irony was bitter. They had been welcomed into the galactic community, and now they were being invaded on the same day. "Coalition reinforcements?" she asked. General Dong's face was grim. 30 ships, that's all they're sending." 30, couldn't believe it, against 500. "They say Earth isn't strategically important," the general replied. The Coalition Council is still debating whether to commit more forces. They're worried about leaving their own systems undefended. Felt a flash of anger but pushed it down. There was no time for emotions. What about our fleet? 75 ships ready for combat, Dong said. All equipped with Coalition technology. Energy shields, plasma weapons, subspace drives, the best equipment available. Captain entered the command center, his flight suit still wet with sweat from a training exercise. He was young, confident, one of the best pilots in the fleet. His ship, the Meteor, was a sleek destroyer built just last year using Coalition designs. "Sir, the pilots are ready," reported. "We can launch in 10 minutes." "Good," Dong replied. "You'll form the first wave. Buy us time for the rest of the fleet to mobilize." The Coalition vessels arrived first, 30 gleaming ships that took position around Earth's orbit. Their commanders were polite but clearly skeptical about humanity's ability to contribute to the fight. They had the latest weapons, the finest shields, the fastest engines. They expected an easy victory. They were wrong. The fleet emerged from subspace at the edge of the solar system. Their ships were massive, dark, covered in strange angular armor. They moved in perfect formation, like a school of predators sensing blood in the water. "All ships engage," General Dong ordered. The human and Coalition fleets surged forward to meet them. Captain led his squadron with skill and daring, his ship dancing through space as it fired plasma lances at the enemy. The Coalition vessels followed, their weapons blazing with energy. For the first few minutes, it seemed like they might have a chance. Then they opened fire. Their weapons were unlike anything humanity or the Coalition had seen. Purple beams that seemed to bend reality itself, passing through energy shields as if they weren't there. When they struck a ship, the vessel simply stopped working. Engines died. Weapons went silent. Life support failed. "Shields are useless," shouted over the communication channel. "They're going right through." A Coalition cruiser exploded to left. Another lost power and began drifting helplessly. The followed up with conventional weapons, tearing the disabled ships apart with focused energy blasts. The battle became a slaughter. Captain tried everything. He dodged, he weaved, he used every trick he had learned. But a beam caught his ship anyway. The Meteor's systems crashed instantly, and his crew had to evacuate in escape pods, watching helplessly as their ship was destroyed. "Fall back," General Dong ordered. "All ships retreat to Mars orbit." The survivors pulled back, leaving debris and bodies floating in the void. Of 75 human ships, only 45 remained. The Coalition had lost 12 vessels, and they hadn't even slowed down. In the command center, the mood was dark. Officers stared at their screens, trying to understand what had happened. The Coalition technology they had been so proud of was worthless against this enemy. Doctor worked frantically at her station, analyzing the weapons. "It's a phase disruption beam," she explained. "It shifts matter slightly out of normal space. Energy shields can't stop it because they exist in normal space, and it creates an electromagnetic pulse cascade that fries modern computer systems." "Can we defend against it?" asked. "Not with what we have," admitted. "All our ships use Coalition standard technology, sophisticated computers, energy-based shields, plasma weapons. They know exactly how to counter it all. They've been fighting Coalition-level civilizations for years." Ambassador sat down heavily in a chair. Her face was pale. "So we're defeated, that's it." "No," a voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Admiral walked slowly into the command center, leaning slightly on a cane. Commander was with him, her tablet clutched tightly in her hands. "We're not defeated," continued. "We're just fighting with the wrong weapons." General Dong frowned. "What do you mean?" Stepped forward, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "They can counter modern technology because it's predictable, standardized. The Coalition has been using the same basic designs for centuries, but they've never faced anything like our old ships. The museum ships, Dong looked at her like she was crazy. Those are antiques. Those are survivors, corrected. They were built when humanity didn't know about energy shields or subspace drives. They were designed to fight and win using basic principles: physics, chemistry, kinetics. Began to understand. No computers to crash, no energy shields to bypass. Exactly, said, her eyes bright with excitement. The museum ships use manual controls with digital assistance, not full automation. They have physical armor, not energy barriers. Their weapons are solid projectiles and explosives, not energy beams. A young officer named Wu spoke up skeptically. Sir, those ships are over 100 years old. They're slow, they're weak. Sending them against thee is suicide. Smiled grimly. Lieutenant, I fought on those ships. I know what they can do, and right now they're our only chance. General Dong looked at the tactical display. The fleet was regrouping, preparing for their final assault on Earth. He had maybe 6 hours before they attacked again. How many can you make operational? He asked. 40 ships, replied. They're already maintained in perfect condition. We just need crews. I'll crew them, said. There are thousands of veterans who trained on those old systems. We've been waiting for the call. Ambassador stood up. The Coalition won't support this. They'll think we're insane. Let them think what they want, replied. This is Earth. These are our people. We'll defend them our way. General Dong made his decision. He pressed the emergency broadcast button, sending a message across the entire Sol system. Attention all retired military personnel. This is General Dong. We are activating the museum fleet. If you served on pre-coalition vessels, report to the Orbital Heritage Museum immediately. Earth needs you. Your ships need you. Across the planet, in retirement homes and quiet farms and peaceful cities, old soldiers heard the call. They looked at each other with understanding. They kissed their families goodbye, and they began to move. In orbit, Commander and her team ran through the museum corridors, bringing ancient systems online. The ships hummed with power for the first time in decades. In the launch bays, mechanics loaded tungsten rounds into and armed nuclear torpedoes. Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his hands on controls he hadn't touched in 40 years. Around him, his old crew took their stations. They were gray-haired now, their hands slower than they used to be. But they remembered. They knew these ships like their own children. Sir, Captain limped onto the bridge, his arm in a sling from his earlier escape. Permission to serve, sir. Looked at the young officer. You're injured. I can still fire a gun, replied stubbornly. Nodded. Welcome aboard, Captain. Man the weapons station. The museum fleet began to move. The museum station was chaos. Old veterans arrived in shuttles and personal craft, some walking with canes, others moving slowly but with purpose in their eyes. They wore pieces of ancient uniforms, medals from forgotten wars, the pride of service still strong in their hearts despite decades of civilian life. Commander directed teams throughout the station. Her engineers worked alongside the returning veterans, learning the old systems, understanding technology that predated everything they knew. The museum ships were waking up, one by one, their reactors coming online with deep rumbles that echoed through the hull. Lieutenant Wu stood in the engineering section of the destroyer Relentless, watching in disbelief as Chief Engineer Da manually calibrated the firing system. There were no voice commands, just physical switches and analog gauges. This is insane, Wu muttered. We're really going to fight in these. An old man working nearby turned to look at him. Commander Jin, who had served on the Relentless 30 years ago. His hands moved over the controls with practiced ease, like a musician returning to an instrument after a long absence. Young man, Jin said calmly, do you know why these ships survived while so many others didn't? Wu shook his head. Because they're simple, Jin explained. When your fancy computer crashes, you're helpless. When my manual control breaks, I can fix it with a wrench and some wire. The enemy can jam your signals, hack your systems, disrupt your energy. But they can't stop a chunk of metal moving at 3% of light speed. Da nodded in agreement. I've been studying these designs for weeks, she said. The Coalition thinks they're primitive, but they're actually brilliant. Every system has 3 backups. You can control everything manually if you need to. And the weapons, she smiled. The weapons are terrifying. She brought up a schematic on her tablet showing Wu the system. This fires a solid tungsten rod. No explosives, no energy signature, just mass and velocity. When it hits something, all that kinetic energy has to go somewhere. It punches through armor like it's made of paper. But they have shields, Wu protested. Energy shields, Jin corrected. Designed to deflect plasma and energy weapons. They don't do much against physical objects moving that fast. In another section of the station, Commander worked with Admiral on the Indomitable. The massive carrier was the heart of the museum fleet, and it needed special attention. Had made careful modifications over the past hours, updating the targeting computers while keeping the core systems analog. The Coalition offered to upgrade our systems, said as she worked. They wanted to install their standard equipment. I refused. Now I'm glad I did. Watched her with approval. You understand these ships. Most people see old technology and think it means weakness, but there's strength in simplicity, reliability, predictability for us, unpredictability for the enemy. Captain joined them on the bridge. He had been reassigned from the modern fleet to help command the museum ships. The Coalition officers had protested, calling it a waste of talent, but had volunteered. He believed in what they were trying to do. Status report, he asked. Pulled up a list on her screen. 40 ships operational, 22 destroyers and cruisers, 8 submarines converted for space combat, 6 heavy battleships, 3 carriers including the Indomitable, and 1 experimental dreadnought. The Last Stand asked. Nodded, my old command. The biggest, slowest, most heavily armored ship humanity ever built. I thought I'd die before I saw her fly again. She's a monster, said with something like affection. 5,000 tons of armor plating, nuclear torpedoes with manual targeting, and a ram prow reinforced with titanium. Wu, who had followed to the bridge, looked shocked. A ram prow for ramming other ships. Sometimes the old ways work best, replied simply. Outside the station, the museum fleet was gathering. The ships looked nothing like the sleek Coalition vessels. They were bulky, angular, covered in antennae and sensor arrays from different eras. Some had paint jobs that were decades old. Others showed scars from ancient battles, carefully preserved as part of their history. But they moved with purpose. The crews knew their ships. The weapons were loaded and ready. And most importantly, they had something the modern fleet lacked. They had nothing to lose and everything to prove. The Coalition command contacted them, the communication full of static from the older radio systems. Museum Fleet, this is Coalition command. We strongly advise against this course of action. Your vessels are not rated for modern combat. You will be destroyed. Admiral took the communication himself. Coalition command, this is Admiral. We appreciate your concern, but this is our planet and these are our ships. We will defend our home. There was a long pause. Then the Coalition commander spoke again, her voice softer. Then, good luck, fight well. Doctor's voice came through on a different channel. She was still in the Earth Command Center, analyzing every piece of data about the Admiral. I'm sending you all the intelligence we have. They use sophisticated targeting systems based on energy signatures and subspace readings. Your ships should be almost invisible to them. Almost asked. You still have fusion reactors, explained. They'll show up eventually, but compared to plasma drives and subspace engines, you'll look like background noise until you're very close. That gave an idea. Captain Commander joined me in the planning room. They gathered around a holographic display showing the solar system. The fleet was moving in from the outer edge, heading straight for Earth. They had stopped to regroup after the first battle, probably assuming the humans were finished. "They're arrogant," said, pointing at the enemy formation. "They think they've already won. They're not taking us seriously." "Can we use that?" asked. "Yes," began sketching a plan on the display. "The modern fleet will engage them here at Mars orbit. They'll fight conventionally, make them think nothing has changed. While they're focused on that, the museum fleet approaches from below the orbital plane, using the sun to mask our signatures." Picked up his thought. "We hit them from an unexpected angle, using weapons they've never seen before." "Exactly," confirmed. "Speed and surprise. We get one chance at this. If they adapt to our tactics, we're finished." Commander Jin entered the planning room. "Admiral, the crews are ready. They're old, but they remember how to fight." "Good," replied. He looked around at the faces surrounding him. Young and old, experienced and new, all of them committed to this desperate plan. "I won't lie to you. This is dangerous. Many of us won't come home. These ships are strong, but they're not invincible." No one looked away. No one suggested retreat. "But," continued, his voice growing stronger, "we have advantages. We have surprise. We have weapons they've never encountered. We have decades of combat experience in these exact vessels. And most importantly, we're fighting for our home. They are here to conquer. We're here to survive." Lieutenant Wu, who had been skeptical just hours before, straightened his shoulders. He finally understood what the old veterans had known all along. These ships weren't museum pieces. They were tools of war, tested in real combat, proven in real blood. "Sir," Wu said firmly, "the Relentless is ready for battle." One by one, the other commanders reported in. The submarines, the destroyers, the battleships, the carriers, all operational, all crewed, all ready. On Earth, General Dong watched the museum fleet moving into position. Beside him, Ambassador held her breath. This was it, humanity's last desperate gamble. "Museum fleet," Dong transmitted, "you are clear to engage, protect Earth. Show them what humanity can do." Admiral stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, looking out at the stars. Around him, his crew worked at their stations, hands steady despite their age. He thought of all the battles they had fought together, all the times they had faced impossible odds. "All ships," he broadcast to the museum fleet. "This is Admiral. Today, we fight not with the future, but with the past. We fight with the ships and weapons that carried humanity to the stars. Let the galaxy see what we built before we knew fear. Let them learn that old does not mean weak. Engage at will." The museum fleet moved forward, ancient engines burning bright, heading toward a battle that would decide the fate of Earth and prove that sometimes the old ways are the best ways. The fleet moved through space like a dark wave of death. 500 warships, each one bristling with weapons that had destroyed countless civilizations. Their commander sat in the flagship's command throne, watching the human forces gather near Mars. The battle would be over in minutes. Another primitive species crushed beneath the boot. He didn't see the museum fleet approaching from below. The modern human and coalition ships engaged first, exactly as planned. Captain, now serving as weapons officer on the Indomitable, watched the tactical display as the contemporary vessels opened fire. Plasma lances lit up the darkness. Energy shields flared and died. Ships on both sides took damage, but they were winning. They were always winning. "Hold position," Admiral commanded calmly. "Let them think nothing has changed." The museum fleet drifted closer, running silent, their fusion reactors barely ticking over. Against the brightness of the sun behind them, they were almost invisible. The sensors swept past them again and again, detecting nothing significant. Commander monitored the approach from her station. 2 minutes to optimal firing range. All ships prepare weapons, ordered. Remember, first strike has to count. On the destroyer Relentless, Commander Jin's hands moved over the manual firing controls. He had done this 1,000 times in training and combat. His fingers remembered the exact pressure needed, the timing, the feel of the system responding to his commands. Lieutenant Wu stood beside him, no longer skeptical. He had spent the past hours learning from Jin, understanding that these old systems weren't primitive, they were refined, perfected through actual combat rather than computer simulations. Loaded, Wu reported. Tungsten penetrators ready. Good, Jin replied. Remember, aim for their engine clusters. Even if their armor is strong, engines are always vulnerable. On Earth, Doctor monitored everything through the long-range sensors. She saw the museum fleet creeping closer, saw the completely focused on the modern ships. She held her breath, praying this would work. 1 minute called out. Admiral stood at the center of the Indomitable's bridge, calm and steady. Around him, his crew was ready. Captain manned the navigation station, his hands on controls that were older than he was. The ship felt solid beneath them, built to last, built to take punishment and keep fighting. 30 seconds. They were tearing through the modern fleet. Another coalition ship went dark, its systems fried by the phase disruption beams. The defenders were falling back, trying to buy time, trying to survive just a little longer. 10 seconds. Raised his hand. Every ship in the museum fleet locked onto their targets. 40 ancient warships, 40 angles of attack, 40 surprises they had never imagined. Fire. The Indomitable launched first. 50 tungsten penetrators erupted from her, each one a solid rod of metal traveling at 3% of light speed. No explosions, no energy signatures, just mass and velocity turned into weapons. They didn't know they were under attack until the penetrators hit. 12 warships simply came apart. The tungsten rods punched through their hulls, the kinetic energy tearing them from stern to bow. There was no warning, no defense, no time to react. One moment the ships were whole, the next they were debris. Direct hits, shouted from the weapons station. 12 confirmed kills. The fleet erupted into chaos. Alarms blared across their ships. Where had that attack come from? Their sensors finally picked up the museum fleet, but the readings made no sense. These weren't modern ships. These were antiques. The commander screamed orders. Destroy those vessels, all weapons fire. But the museum fleet was already moving. The old submarines dove under the formation, using three-dimensional tactics that the enemy hadn't expected. The destroyer Relentless and her sisters opened fire with their, creating a storm of metal that tore through armor. A squadron of fighters broke off to engage, their phase disruption weapons ready to disable the human ships. They targeted the submarine Deep Hunter, firing their beams directly into her hull. Nothing happened. The phase beams passed through the Deep Hunter's position, but the ship kept coming. It had no energy shields to disrupt, no sophisticated computers to crash. The submarine's analog systems didn't even notice the attack. Target those fighters, Commander Jin ordered from the Relentless. The museum ship's point defense systems opened up. These weren't energy weapons or guided missiles. They were old-fashioned, firing solid shells at incredible rates. The fighters' shields, designed to stop plasma and energy, did nothing against simple bullets traveling at high velocity. 20 fighters were destroyed in seconds. They were adapting now, bringing their conventional weapons to bear. Energy lances struck the museum ships, and this time they did damage. The carrier Pathfinder took a direct hit, her armor glowing white-hot but holding. Damage report, her captain called out. Hull breach on deck 7, armor penetrated but inner hull intact. We can keep fighting. And that was the difference. The modern ships died when they were hit once. The museum ships were built to take damage and survive. Layered armor, redundant systems, compartmentalized design. Every lesson learned from centuries of naval warfare applied to space combat. The Indomitable launched her fighters, ancient atmospheric craft that had been retrofitted for space. They looked ridiculous compared to the sleek fighters, but they worked. Their combustion engines and solid fuel systems couldn't be disrupted by phase weapons. Their pilots, many of them veterans in their 70s, flew with skill born from thousands of hours of real experience. Admiral coordinated the attack from the bridge, his voice calm despite the chaos around them. Battleships focus fire on their heavy cruisers. Submarines hit them with EMP torpedoes. Destroyers keep screening our carriers. The battleships advanced, their massive bulk absorbing fire that would have destroyed lesser vessels. The Titan took 7 direct hits and kept coming, her never stopping their mechanical thunder. Commander armed a special weapon she had prepared, a mass driver loaded with a fragment of asteroid, wrapped in explosive charges. It was crude, dangerous, and possibly insane. Admiral, requesting permission to fire the rock. Didn't hesitate, do it. The Indomitable shuddered as the mass driver launched. The asteroid fragment, 3 tons of iron and stone, flew toward the formation. The enemy point defense systems opened fire, but they were designed for missiles and energy weapons. They couldn't stop a solid rock. It hit a heavy cruiser dead center. The explosive charges detonated on impact, and the kinetic energy did the rest. The cruiser broke in half, its reactor going critical and taking out 2 nearby ships in the explosion. Target destroyed, reported, his voice filled with savage joy. The battle was turning. The museum ships had destroyed over 200 vessels, using tactics and weapons the enemy had never encountered. But it was costly. The destroyer Hammer took a fatal hit and exploded. The submarine's Silent Death lost power and drifted away. The battleship Iron Duke was crippled, half her crew dead. The flagship finally broke through the defensive screen, heading straight for Earth. It was massive, 3 kilometers long, bristling with weapons. If it reached orbit, it could destroy the entire planet. Admiral saw it coming. He made his decision instantly. All ships, this is, continue engaging the main fleet. The flagship is mine. Sir, Captain turned to look at him. You can't mean. Take command of the fleet, Captain said calmly. He was already transferring control to station. You'll do fine. He left the Indomitable's bridge and boarded a shuttle. 5 minutes later, he was approaching the last stand, the massive dreadnought that had been his first command decades ago. The ship was waiting for him, weapons armed, engines hot. Took the command chair. Around him, a skeleton crew of volunteers. They all knew what he was planning. They all accepted it. Helm, intercept course for the flagship, full power. The last stand accelerated, her ancient engines pushing her faster than she was ever meant to go. The flagship saw her coming and opened fire. Energy lances tore into the dreadnought's armor. Explosions ripped across her hull. But the last stand kept coming. Armed the nuclear torpedoes, all of them, set for proximity detonation. He aimed the ship's massive ram prow directly at the flagship's bridge section. For Earth, he whispered. The nuclear torpedoes fired first, a spread of 10 warheads that detonated almost simultaneously. The flagship's shields collapsed under the assault. Its weapons went offline. For a moment, it was vulnerable. The last stand struck like the fist of an angry god. The dreadnought's titanium prow punched through the flagship's hull, driving deep into its core. The impact destroyed both ships instantly. The explosion lit up the darkness like a new sun, visible from Earth's surface. On the Indomitable, Captain watched the screens go white. When they cleared, both the last stand and the flagship were gone. The remaining fleet scattered in confusion. Their commander was dead, their flagship destroyed, and these primitive humans were killing them with ancient weapons. They had never faced such an enemy. They didn't know how to fight an opponent that didn't follow the rules. "All ships," transmitted, his voice breaking slightly, "continue the attack. Don't let the Admiral's sacrifice be in vain." The museum fleet pressed forward. The silence after battle was always strange. Captain stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, watching the debris field where thousands had died just hours before. The fleet was gone, either destroyed or fled into subspace. Earth was safe, but the cost had been terrible. 18 museum ships lost: the Hammer, the Silent Death, the Iron Duke, the Last Stand, and hundreds of brave souls who had answered the call one final time. Commander moved through the ship with her damage control teams, her face streaked with soot and tears. The modern fleet had suffered too. Only 22 human ships remained operational, and the coalition forces were down to 12 vessels. But they had won. Against impossible odds, using century-old technology, they had defended Earth. General Dong's voice came through on the communication channel. "All ships return to orbit. We have medical teams standing by. You did it. You saved us all." The surviving museum ships limped back toward Earth, their armor, their hulls breached, but their crews proud. On the destroyer Relentless, Commander Jin helped Lieutenant Wu secure the systems. The young officer had fought like a veteran, learning fast, adapting faster. "I was wrong," Wu said quietly, "about these ships, about the old ways." Jin smiled tiredly. "You weren't the only one. The whole galaxy thought we were crazy." "Maybe crazy is what we needed," Wu replied. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets. They had watched the battle through telescope feeds and sensor data. They had seen the museum ships, the vessels they had visited on school trips and family outings, fighting and dying to protect their home. News spread across the planet. The antiques had saved them. The relics had won. Ambassador stood in the Coalition Command Center as alien delegates filed in. Their faces showed shock, confusion, and something that looked like respect. The same delegates who had mocked the museum just yesterday now stood in silence before the tactical displays showing the battle's aftermath. "Impossible," one alien whispered. "They defeated them with kinetic weapons and manual controls." "Not impossible," corrected gently, "just unexpected." The Coalition's Supreme Chancellor contacted Earth directly. His voice was formal but sincere. "Ambassador, Captain, on behalf of the Galactic Coalition, I offer our deepest respect. Humanity has proven itself in ways we did not anticipate. Your tactics, your weapons, your courage, they have given us much to think about." Doctor compiled reports through the night, analyzing every aspect of the battle. The data was astonishing. The museum ships had achieved a kill ratio of 5-1 against a technologically superior enemy. Their simple systems had been more reliable under stress than the sophisticated coalition equipment. Their crews, despite their age, had performed flawlessly. "We've been doing this wrong," explained to General Dong. "The coalition has been advancing technology for so long that they forgot the basics. They standardized everything, made it all predictable. They had studied coalition tactics for decades, but they had no defense against something different." "Something old," Dong added. "Old but effective," agreed. "The museum ships taught us that advancement isn't always about moving forward. Sometimes you need to remember where you came from." 3 days later, a memorial service was held at the museum station. The surviving crews stood at attention as the names of the fallen were read aloud. Admiral, Commander Park, Lieutenant Min, Captain Sung. On and on, over 300 names, each one a hero. Commander spoke at the ceremony, her voice steady despite her grief. "These people answered the call when humanity needed them most. They flew ships that others called useless. They used weapons that others called primitive. And they saved billions of lives. The museum is no longer just a place of history. It is a place of honor." Captain received a promotion to Admiral, taking over Seoul Defense Fleet Command. His first order was to integrate the surviving museum ships into active defense rotations. They would no longer be showpieces. They would be guardians. Commander Jin was offered retirement again with full honors. He declined. "The Relentless still needs a commander," he said simply. Lieutenant Wu became his executive officer, eager to learn more from the veteran. The coalition sent a delegation to study human pre-space age military doctrine. They wanted to understand how humanity had fought before meeting the stars. Other species in the coalition began reviewing their own history, looking for forgotten techniques and technologies that might prove useful. Commander was promoted to Chief of Coalition Defense Research. Her first project was creating a comprehensive database of pre-energy weapons and tactics. She worked with veterans from every species, collecting knowledge that had been nearly lost. "They taught us a valuable lesson," she explained to a gathering of coalition military leaders. "When you standardize everything, you become predictable. When you rely only on the technology, you become vulnerable. Every species in this coalition has a history of warfare before they reach the stars. That history has value." The Coalition Council officially recognized humanity's contribution with a new title, Historical Warfare Division. Human officers would train coalition forces in primitive tactics, manual controls, kinetic weapons, analog systems, and the aggressive close combat strategies that had defined early human military doctrine. 6 months later, another hostile force approached coalition space. The Empire, confident in their advanced stealth technology and quantum weapons, they expected the coalition to fight with their standard tactics. They were surprised when a mixed fleet of modern ships and museum vessels engaged them. The modern ships used advanced sensors and long-range weapons. The museum ships provided close support with kinetic weapons and manual targeting that the stealth systems couldn't fool. The battle was over in 3 hours, the confused and defeated. Word spread through the galaxy. The coalition had changed. They were no longer predictable. They had learned from the humans to mix old and new, to fight unpredictably, to remember that ancient solutions could solve modern problems. On the first anniversary of the battle, Captain and Commander stood together at the memorial wall. New names had been added, museum ship crews who had fallen in subsequent battles, but there were far fewer names than there might have been. "Do you think the Admiral would be proud?" asked. Nodded. "He died proving a point, that experience matters, that the old ways have value, that humanity's history is our strength, not our weakness." They looked out at the museum fleet, now twice as large as before. The coalition had donated ships from their own history, asking humanity to preserve and study them. The museum had become a center of learning, where officers from every species came to understand that military doctrine was more than just the latest technology. Lieutenant Wu, now promoted to commander, supervised a training exercise where coalition officers learned to use manual targeting systems. He smiled, remembering his own skepticism just a year ago. "Old doesn't mean obsolete," he told his students. "It means tested, proven, reliable. The weapon is exciting, but the old weapon is the one you can trust when everything else fails." On Earth, children visited the museum with new respect. They touched the hulls of ships that had fought and bled. They learned the names of the heroes who had crewed them. They understood that history wasn't just something to remember, it was something to learn from. Ambassador negotiated humanity's new role in the coalition from a position of strength. No longer the junior member, humanity was now the keeper of knowledge, the teachers of tactics that other species had forgotten, the reminder that progress didn't mean abandoning the past. A message came through to Earth's command center. Long-range sensors detected another unknown fleet approaching coalition space. They were massive, aggressive, confident in their superiority. Admiral read the report calmly. He pressed the communication button. Museum fleet, this is Admiral, we have incoming hostiles. They think we'll fight like the old coalition did, predictable, standardized, easy to counter. He smiled slightly. All ships prepare for launch. Let's remind them what happens when you underestimate history. Let's show them that humanity doesn't just preserve the past, we learn from it, and we use it to protect our future. In the museum docks, engines began to warm up. Ancient were loaded. Nuclear torpedoes were armed. Veterans and new recruits took their positions side by side, ready to fight with weapons that the galaxy had forgotten. The museum ships moved out into the darkness, their armor but strong, their weapons old but deadly. Behind them followed the modern fleet, ready to support, ready to learn, ready to fight alongside their ancient companions. The aliens had laughed at Earth's museum ships. They had called them relics, antiques, useless pieces of history. They would never laugh again. In the void of space, humanity's past and future moved together, protecting the present, teaching the galaxy that some lessons are timeless. That honor, courage, and skill never become obsolete. That the warriors who came before had wisdom worth preserving. And that sometimes, the best weapon against the future is the proven strength of the past.